Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into William O. Douglas's autobiographical essay, Deep Water. And look, this isn't just some simple story about learning to swim. Douglas literally dissects the anatomy of terror and the sheer mechanics of human willpower. We're going to reconstruct his journey of conquering a completely paralyzing phobia. It's a brilliant look at how trauma takes root in the mind and exactly what it takes to tear it back out.
We'll be tracing this chronological journey step by step. Starting with the origins of the terror, that awful YMCA misadventure, crossing the curtain of life, dealing with a paralyzing handicap, the actual mechanics of building a swimmer, and finally, conquering those lingering residual doubts.
So Part 1, Origins of the Terror, the Making of a Phobia.
To understand the fear, we have to look at where Douglas came from. This is a guy shaped by diverse American landscapes. He was born in Maine, Minnesota, taught high school in Yakima, and eventually made his way to Yale, where, fun fact, he became friends with none other than Franklin D. Roosevelt. But it was the treacherous Yakima River that really started this whole thing. His mother was constantly warning him about local drownings there. So, the very first seeds of aquatic anxiety were planted early on. He was essentially primed to be afraid.
And then a terrifying childhood incident absolutely compounded those early anxieties. Picture this. He's just 3 or 4 years old on a California beach. The surf is incredibly powerful, and the waves actually knock him down and literally bury him. His breath is gone. And while his father is just standing there laughing, sheer terror takes root in this little kid's heart. Fast forward a bit, he's 10 or 11, and he decides, okay, I'm going to conquer this by heading to the safe YMCA pool in Yakima. But right from the jump, he's fighting internal battles. He specifically notes how much he hated to walk in naked and show off his incredibly skinny legs. But he says he's subdued my pride and did it anyway.
Which brings us to Part 2, the YMCA misadventure, and a truly stark terror.
So he's at the pool. He's actually just starting to feel a little bit at ease, paddling around with his new water wings, kind of aping the other boys. The place is quiet, the tiled bottom is as white and clean as a bathtub. And then, our antagonist abruptly enters the scene. In walks this big bruiser of a boy. He's maybe 18, a beautiful physical specimen, with thick hair on his chest and rippling muscles. And with this careless, taunting question, "Hi, skinny, how'd you like to be ducked?" Douglas's brief moment of comfort is over.
It happens in a flash. With zero warning, this bruiser just picks him up and tosses him right into the 9-foot deep end. Douglas lands in a sitting position, immediately swallows a mouthful of water, and starts going straight to the bottom. Now he's definitely frightened, but crucially, he notes that he wasn't frightened out of his wits just yet.
Even as he's sinking down into that water, his mind is actively racing. He actually formulates a distinct survival strategy on the way down. He tells himself, okay, when my feet hit the bottom, I'll make a great spring upward. In his own mind, he imagined he would, quote, bob to the surface like a cork.
But as you can probably guess, his carefully constructed plan completely fell apart. The logic was sound, right? Hit the bottom, spring up, lie flat, paddle to safety. But the reality? An absolute nightmare. Those 9 feet honestly felt more like 90 to him. He summons all his strength to push off, but instead of popping up like a cork, he comes up agonizingly slowly. He opens his eyes and sees nothing but water with this sickening dirty yellow tinge. His hands clutch at absolute nothingness. And that is when the real panic officially sets in.
Moving to Part 3, the curtain of life and descending into oblivion.
We are now entering the most visceral, terrifying segment of his whole explainer. The sensory narration here is just incredible. He writes, "I flailed at the surface of the water, swallowed and choked." He tries desperately to bring his legs up, but they just hang there as dead weights, completely paralyzed and rigid. That physical paralysis perfectly mirrors his escalating psychological terror. A massive force is pulling him under, and he's screaming, but of course, only the water can hear him.
Let's break down these 3 distinct descents, because this is where sheer, stark terror completely takes over the driver's seat. On descent number 1, he's fighting like you do in a bad nightmare, lungs aching, head throbbing. He hits the bottom, tries to jump again, but the water is still right there. On the second descent, the terror takes an even deeper hold. He describes it like a great charge of electricity. He is literally shrieking underwater, totally stiff and rigid with fear. His arms and legs simply refuse to move. By the third descent, he sucks for air but gets only water. And that yellowish light, it begins to fade out entirely.
All effort just ceases. A blackness sweeps over his brain, completely wiping out the fear and the panic. Suddenly, he feels drowsy. He imagines these tender arms around him, like his mother's arms. He completely relaxes into the sensation of dying, writing this haunting line, "I crossed to oblivion, and the curtain of life fell." The very next thing he remembers, he's lying on his stomach beside the pool, vomiting, while that bruiser is standing there weakly defending himself, saying, "But I was only fooling." Meanwhile, someone else points out that the kid nearly died.
Let's look at part 4, a paralyzing, haunting handicap.
You see, this trauma didn't just fade away after he walked home that day. It became an icy horror that possessed him for years. Think about it. Whenever he tried to enjoy the great outdoors, the terror from that pool would instantly rush back. We're talking about the waters of the Cascades, wading the Tieton River, wading the Bumping River, bathing in warm lake of the Goat Rocks, or even sitting in canoes on main lakes fishing for landlocked salmon. Every single one of these experiences was ruined. His legs would paralyze, his knees would get wobbly, his stomach sick, and that icy horror would just grab his heart. His life was essentially being held hostage by this fear.
Which brings us to part 5, building a swimmer and the mechanics of willpower.
Finally, one October, he decides he's had enough. He refuses to let the fear win. So he hires an instructor who systematically dismantles this overwhelming phobia into manageable mechanical steps. Step 1. The instructor puts a belt around Douglas, attaches it to an overhead pulley, and they go back and forth across the pool for 3 whole months, just to slacken the tension. Step 2, the mechanical breathing. He teaches him to put his face underwater to exhale and raise his nose to inhale, repeating it hundreds of times. Step 3, holding the edge of the pool and just kicking his legs. For weeks, they completely refused to work, but gradually, very gradually, they relaxed and started obeying his commands.
Through this relentless, almost stubborn repetition, the fear is slowly stripped of its power. As Douglas puts it, thus, piece by piece, he built a swimmer. By April, the instructor had perfected each of these individual pieces and integrated them into a solid, confident crawl stroke. The instructor's job was officially done.
And finally, part 6, conquering the residual doubts, the ultimate test.
But here's the thing. Just because the instructor was finished didn't mean Douglas was finished. The ultimate test of his own mind still awaited him, and he had to do it alone. So from October to April, he works with the instructor. In April, he dives off and swims the length of the pool alone, but these tiny vestiges of terror start creeping back. And I love this part. He actually speaks out loud to the fear, saying, "Trying to scare me, eh? Well, here's to you. Look." By July, he's swimming up and down another lake, but he's still not satisfied. He needs to know for absolutely sure. So at his very first opportunity, he hurries west for the ultimate solo test.
Every specific location on this final path west represents a deliberate, defiant footstep toward taking back the life that trauma stole from him. Listen to this route. He hikes up the Tieton to Conrad Meadows, pushes up the Conrad Creek Trail to Meade Glacier, and finally sets up camp in the high meadow by the side of Warm Lake. He is totally alone in the wild, facing down the very waters that once paralyzed him.
The next morning, he strips down and dives right in. He swims across to the other shore and back. And he specifically notes that he did it just as Doug Copron used to do. He lets out this massive shout of joy, and in a beautifully poetic moment, Gilbert Peak returned the echo. He had completely, undeniably conquered his fear of water. The victory was absolute.
Reflecting on this profound journey, he actually ties his deeply personal victory directly to the famous philosophical thesis coined by his old Yale friend, FDR. All we have to fear is fear itself. Douglas realizes something huge here. In death, there is actually only peace. The true terror lies entirely in the fear of death. Because he had fully experienced both the sensation of dying and the stark terror it produced, his actual will to live grew exponentially. He was finally released, free to walk the trails, climb the peaks, and just brush aside that fear forever.
And that leaves us with something incredibly powerful to think about. Douglas proved that even the most crippling, paralyzing terror, the kind that makes you literally cross into oblivion, can be mechanically deconstructed, piece by piece, with relentless willpower. Experiencing the terror of death only intensified his will to live. So it leaves us asking, if stark terror can be dismantled, what haunting fear, what personal mountain are you finally ready to conquer next?